always been drawn to isolated places. So when I planned my solo trip to the high desert, I expected long stretches of nothing but sand, scrub, and distant rock formations. That's what made it perfect. No roads, no people, no interruptions. Just me, my pack, and the stars. I arrived at my chosen spot late in the afternoon. It was a narrow canyon that cut through a plateau. I set up my tent in a small depression where I could see the sky without obstruction, and gathered a handful of dry brush for a fire. The first night was quiet. Too quiet, maybe. The wind stirred the sand occasionally, but no animals moved through the rocks, and the stars shone so brightly I could see shadows cast by the smallest stones. I fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the hike, but at some point in the night, I woke to a presence I couldn't explain. It wasn't a sound or a movement. It was more like the space around me had changed. The air felt thicker, the darkness denser. I couldn't breathe properly, though my chest wasn't tight. I forced myself to sit up and scan the canyon. That's when I saw it. Across the rim, something crouched on the edge of the rock, blending perfectly with the shadows. It was tall, unnaturally thin, and I could swear its head was tilted at an impossible angle, looking straight at me even though I couldn't make out features. I told myself I was seeing shapes in the dark, that the desert was playing tricks on me, but then the shape moved. Or maybe it wasn't moving at all. Time felt fractured. One moment it was there, the next it seemed to vanish into the rocks without leaving a trace. I tried to convince myself I had imagined it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't gone anywhere. I felt it, watching, patient, waiting. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Every time I closed my eyes, the canyon wall seemed closer, the shadows deeper. When dawn finally came, the desert looked normal again. Nothing crouched on the rocks, nothing lurking in the crevices. I packed quickly and hiked back down the canyon, telling myself the desert had just played a cruel trick on me. Months later, I returned to that canyon with friends. I wanted to show them where I had camped. We reached the spot, and my heart stopped. Scratches marred the rock walls around my old tent depression. Long, deep, deliberate marks that no weather or animal could have made. And in the sand, impressions of something tall and narrow, completely unhuman, leading up the canyon and disappearing over the rim. I never went back alone, and I don't plan to. Whatever waits there isn't something I want to meet again. I had been backpacking through New Zealand for a couple of weeks, chasing remote trails and untouched landscapes, when I decided to camp near the lower slopes of Mount Taranaki. The weather reports had warned of fog in the evening, but I thought a little mist would make the forest feel more magical. By late afternoon, the mist rolled in faster than I expected. It was thick and heavy, wrapping the trees in a damp gray blanket. I set up my tent on a small clearing, the ground soft with moss. At first, it was peaceful. I could hear distant streams and the occasional rustle of birds. Around 9 p.m., while boiling water for dinner, I noticed shadows moving through the fog. At first, I thought they were deer, but the shapes were upright, and they didn't move like animals. My stomach sank when I realized the figures seemed to be lingering at the edges of the clearing, watching me. I went back to the tent, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination, but then I heard footsteps crunching in the underbrush. Slow, deliberate, circling. I peeked through the tent flap and saw nothing, yet I felt an unmistakable weight pressing on me, like someone had been standing right behind me for hours. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. The fog seemed to stretch time. At one point, I heard a low whisper. No words, just a sound that made my skin crawl. I tried to speak, to tell myself I was safe, but my voice caught in my throat. By dawn, the fog lifted, revealing the trail back down the mountain. The footprints in the moss weren't mine, and they led straight to the tree line. and then ended. I packed up and left without looking back. Every time I close my eyes, I remember the way the fog swallowed everything, and the feeling that something had been following me the entire night, just beyond my sight. I had chosen a remote forest in Hokkaido for a solo camping trip, drawn by rumors of strange, almost hypnotic sounds that locals claimed came from deep within the woods. I arrived late in the afternoon, carrying my gear, and found a small clearing near a cluster of ancient trees whose bark was dark and furrowed. Their twisted branches arched skyward like gnarled hands. I set up camp quickly, eager to explore before nightfall. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest began to hum. At first, it was subtle, a vibration beneath my feet, like the low echo of a bell carried across distance. Then it grew louder, coalescing into soft, melodic tones, like someone singing far away, yet impossibly close. It wasn't a human voice, not entirely. There was a rhythm to it, hypnotic, as though the forest itself was calling me. I followed the sound deeper into the grove, my flashlight cutting through the fog that had begun to curl around the trunks. The air was thick, sweet, and strange, and the singing seemed to wrap around my thoughts. I realized I had been walking for what felt like hours, yet the clearing and my tent were nowhere in sight. The trees loomed taller here, their bark etched with strange, twisting patterns, almost like symbols. Suddenly, the singing stopped. The silence was heavier than the sound had been, and in that stillness, I noticed movement. Shadows slinking among the trees, long and thin, almost liquid. Then I saw them, the siren trees themselves. Their trunks weren't fully solid. They shifted subtly as if breathing. Faces, faint and distorted, appeared in the bark, mouths open, eyes hollow, as though they were watching me, studying me. Panic set in. I turned to run, but the forest seemed to close in, branches tangling and roots rising to trip me. That's when I felt it, a pull, almost magnetic, like the forest itself wanted me to stay. I struggled, heart pounding, until a sharp, cold wind tore through the grove, scattering the fog and breaking the spell. I bolted blindly, retracing my steps by instinct. When I finally stumbled back into my clearing, the sun had risen, pale and weak. My tent was intact, and for a moment, I felt relief. But then I noticed the bark on the nearest tree. Etched into it were marks, my footprints, impossibly preserved. And beneath them, a faint outline of my face, twisted in fear. I left immediately, carrying only my backpack. But sometimes at night, I dream of that forest, and in the quiet moments, I swear I can hear it again. The soft, impossible singing, calling me back.